And specifically, this is the show's safe point, where the idea is it is safe to talk about everything and everything, but particularly mental health. On today's episode, we have the incredible, the amazing, the return of not Batman, but Dr. Katie Gordon. But it's pretty close. Hi, thank you so much for being here, Dr. Gordon.
Thanks for having me back. I'm so excited to be back to your show.
It's definitely been too long, so that's on me. But we are here to talk about this is very weird because I'm excited about your book, but it is the Suicidal Thoughts Workbook. So I'm going to sound really enthusiastic about it, but it is obviously a very somber topic. So everybody please cut me some slack. I'm just generally a very excitable person. I promise I take the obviously suicide awareness very seriously. Even though I'm just super hyped to be able to. I was able to be one of the people who endorsed the book, and I stand fully behind that. I got a copy of it to check out and play through, and the idea for our intention collage came from this workbook, which now I can tell you. So I'm super excited. But thank you so much, Dr. Gordon, for being here. I will let you talk now. Hi.
Thank you for having me on and for all of your support of the book. I know what you mean. I've been trying to think about how to measure my kind of enthusiasm for suicide prevention while knowing that it's a very serious topic. But I actually think sometimes it helps to talk about some of the more painful topics by allowing space for some levity and lightness where there can be. And so that's really cool that you all did a meaning collage. I'm glad to hear that. I added some art type projects into the book, and so I'm glad that you were able to use that.
Yeah, it's neat. Okay, so let's just dive right in. Let's talk about first if you don't mind, for people who may be new, everybody give us your background spiel, where you come from, and why you decided to put this book together.
Absolutely. So I went to graduate school at Florida State University with someone named Thomas Joyner, and he focused on suicide prevention research, and he's also written books for the public and kind of modeled how important it is to take what we know from research in the therapy room and share that with people that are struggling. And so that was really a big inspiration for me. I was a professor for 10 years, did research, and then switched to being a full-time therapist. And I think that drawing from the research and drawing from my experiences working with people, I realized there was kind of a gap when it came specifically to suicidal thoughts. There are a lot of resources, thankfully, on depression and anxiety and other topics like that, but not a lot focused specifically on suicidal thoughts. And millions of people struggle with suicidal thoughts. And I want both therapists and people who are struggling to have some ideas about what the science says and what therapy says is helpful for that. So that was where the Suicidal Thoughts Workbook came from. And you are the first endorsement on the top front page.
So it's so wild. I'm so that's a compliment in itself to me, but we're focusing on you. This is amazing. So thank you. First of all, thank you for trusting me to endorse your book, for trusting me to read it and go through it. And a lot of it, just to kind of give a little bit of anecdotal experience. And if anybody is interested, a link to the Amazon is right there. I'm posting it in chat. It will be posted afterwards for people watching the VOD. So it came to me in a really interesting time, which is what I wrote in the endorsement, where I wasn't exactly suicidal, but I wasn't feeling my best. And I was going through it, and I was like, because I do go through, I am a depressed person. I live with depression. And I do go through depressive phases. And I was like, do I wait until I'm really depressed to go through this? And I just found that it was, at the time, it was able to almost help me not prevent, but hold back a little bit of the depression. I found out that it helped me not get to that low point that I was that I expect myself to get to. And I found a lot of use of like coming back to it and doing different exercises in different ways. I also found that it didn't talk down to me, which a lot of CBT skill books do. And I just that was super important to me because I do find like it sucks because you're already not feeling well and then they're like, okay, sweetie,
Yeah.
it's gonna be okay. And you're like, well, I don't want you to treat me like a vase or talk to me like I'm gonna explode now. Like I want help. I need help now. But yeah, so thank you for that. And
Well, thank you. I'm glad to hear that because I think that I certainly wanted people to feel supported, people to feel supported while reading it, but knowledgeable, because people are knowledgeable about their own experiences and are capable of working through these things. And so I'm really happy that you didn't feel like it was condescending or talking down to in any way or oversimplifying things. That's the other thing I worry about sometimes with self-help books, where it's like, just think this way or say this to yourself 5 times and you're fine. And it's like, no, I know it's not like that. It's chipping away here and there at those painful things and looking for ways to move forward. So I'm really glad that you felt that way.
well, good, because I did so good. So I kind of I don't want to like literally go through it step by step and be like, how did you come up with this and how did you come up with that? But if you could talk a little bit about just why, I guess, why did you choose CBT to be to be the way to help people walk through suicidal ideation and thoughts and
That's a great question. I think it's from a few different sources. When I was in college, read a cognitive behavioral therapy self-help book, and I found it really helpful. I thought that the skills were helpful. I think if I read it again now, I might look at it differently, but the core messages I thought were helpful. And then as a therapist, I've also seen it make a difference in people's lives. I've seen it connect with people. There is evidence that cognitive behavioral therapy helps with suicidal thoughts, and that was a big driving factor. I think sometimes cognitive behavioral therapy can be compartmentalized into a very specific thing, which is you identify thinking errors, or like, are you having all or nothing thinking? Are you disqualifying the positive? And let's search through the evidence and come up with new thoughts. And I think that is helpful, but I think there's more than that. And so I was glad that my publisher and editor were on board with me pulling in other things: self-compassion, acceptance, mindfulness, which kind of go together. But I feel like it allowed so that if CBT is not the thing that's helping, it's not your fault. Maybe you have a problem that's not the right tool for.
right.
Maybe
Right.
there's another tool. And so that was the hope. But CBT is kind of at the front and on the title because of the research and some of those therapy experiences, and just being influenced by my personal experience, finding it helpful too.
Good. It's yeah, it's one of those where I think it's a very holistic approach, and that's obviously helpful. So I guess in general, maybe walk us through a little bit of like, was there something that inspired you specifically to what, like, why this, why now?
I think that I've had a lot of people in my life, both the people that I work with as a therapist, but also in my personal life, that have been affected and struggled with suicidal thoughts. And there is something about one right now, and often wait lists to get into therapy are
Yeah.
very long. And then once people get in, the training is not always super in depth for helping people who have struggle with suicidal thoughts. And that's something I've heard from patients and also just people in my life, that it's hard to access a way of thinking about suicidal thoughts. I think safety is becoming more to the forefront, that more therapists understand safety and things like that. But beyond that, looking at ways to soothe pain and to build hope and to increase connections, I think there's a gap. So the hope was that people who can't or don't want to access therapy, maybe they have a lot of reasons for wanting to try something privately first before reaching out to a therapist that they could access, that pretty much anyone could access and purchase a workbook, and then possess both basic scientific knowledge about suicidal thoughts, which part of why I included that was because someone close to me said that it was meaningful to them when their therapist explained how common suicidal thoughts are, that they're not alone. And so I do think that like broad picture research part is important, but then also like, how do I directly apply this to my daily life in small steps? So it really was about trying to get tools in the hands of more people who have difficulty accessing it and who look for books. I think there are a lot of self-help books that are more general, that might be like, ways to get happy or to change your life. But I wanted this to be like really easily recognizable to someone struggling with suicidal thoughts. Okay, this is specifically for me. And so those were a lot of the things that led to it. Now, I guess as also one other small part is I had a friend who came out with a self-help book and just kind of talked to him, and he walked me through writing a proposal and all that stuff. So all those things aligned and
into the
and
perfect,
how it happened.
That is exactly how I actually have still wrapped in a Trader Joe's paper bag for the cover. I used to take a CBT help workbook with me because I could not, like, even going to therapy once a week was not enough. And so my therapist had recommended a CBT workbook, and I used to bring it to work. And so that's why I had like wrapped it, and it was my little companion. It was my little helper on a day-to-day basis. And on the bus, as I would get nervous going into work, I would start like, doing different exercises. And that's the other thing that I really liked, is that you specifically also included the why and not just the go do this. And that is also why I think that that's what makes it not condescending, because you don't just say like, okay, go do this. You say, well, this is a really great thing to do if you're feeling this certain way, and here's why. So now you can go try it out on your own. And yeah, I think it makes a really big difference. So thank you for that.
You're welcome. And that's really good to hear. I think that's the way I try to do therapy, because I feel like I don't want to just go do stuff. I want to have a good reason for it, especially if it's hard. And
Right.
so I think hopefully there's some meaning or purpose for saying, okay, well, this specific thing is helpful because of this reason. And then hopefully that it feels like it's collaborative rather than just someone telling you to go do something.
Right. Okay. So let's picture a scenario, which I'm sure people have been in, where you have a friend who is not doing well. How do I get them to read? because it's tough, because I don't want to be like, here, you need this, because never have I ever in my life, when somebody's been like, you have to read this, have I been like, okay, I'm gonna go read it. I've literally every time been like, you don't tell me what to do. So, and this isn't exactly therapy, right? Like it's not therapy, it's a therapy companion, but it is. I can see how somebody who isn't ready for therapy would take it, not maybe offensively, but like how dare you, right? So how do we bridge that? How do we bring this to somebody who we think might need it without sounding like condescending jerks?
I do think a lot about how not to sound like a condescending jerk, because I think that as a therapist, I sometimes will have ideas about what might help, but in the therapy context, it's like someone's come to you for help versus in my personal life. And I'm the same way. I don't really want unsolicited advice either. So my approach that I usually would take is something like, I honestly, I think sometimes sharing that, I've struggled before, and kind of, as I mentioned, the book I read, which was Feeling Good by David Burns. And I found this book helpful, and I wonder if you might think it's helpful. I think it's a little bit different, or this is what I liked about it. So I would probably try to bring it in a way that's like, I'm sharing something that I found helpful versus like, you have a problem and I think this will take care of the problem for you.
Get
But
away from me with your problem. Here's a book. I don't know. Go fix it.
But it is tricky. It
Yeah.
is really tricky because you don't want someone to shut down or feel criticized or something. And so I do think sometimes I'll be overly like, I think I might have a suggestion. Is it okay if I share it with you? And that is based on experience of having pushback from people and pushing back on people when they offer advice I don't want.
Right. Yeah, there's a lot to that. So I've put myself into somebody else's shoes, but it's usually like, the friend who's come with the same problem over and over again. And I not the friend. I'm gonna call out my sister because she's been on the show before, and I don't know if she's watching, but I'm gonna call her out because the conversation will be like, "Wow, how did you figure that out?" And I'm like, "Therapy." And then she'll be like, "Okay, yeah, but," and this is a true story. I could see how, some like this again would be helpful. She had called around because I kept saying, well, therapy helped me. Therapy helped me. So she finally decided to call a therapist, and the therapist picked up the phone, and the third thing she said to her after like hello and everything was, "Are you suicidal? Because if you're suicidal, I can't see you."
Oh my gosh, that's terrible.
And I understand in a cold hard way she might not be the right therapist for you. Like, totally. But I don't know that that is the opening line here.
I hear that, and it makes me feel so frustrated and hurt that it takes so much courage for someone to reach out for help and then to feel turned away. The other thing is that all therapists need to be competent in helping people with suicidal thoughts and behaviors, because it can happen to, as you know, it can happen to anyone at any time, regardless of whether they say they are experiencing it at that moment or not.
Mhm.
And so it's kind of a false sense of control by saying, okay, well, I'm not going to see people in my practice. That's different
Right.
than someone who needs a higher level of care in that moment versus someone who has suicidal thoughts. So many people have suicidal thoughts that are seeking
Right.
treatment that are not at risk or in danger of hurting themselves.
Right.
And we need to intervene then, not turn them away as it gets worse and worse.
Well, that's the other reason I got excited about this. And I was like, yeah, I want you on my show, like, 2 times about this, because I I hope that this helps normalize that conversation. I like we met through suicide prevention social
Mhm.
media, right? And the whole point of a shout out to Rudy, who I think is in the audience. The whole
Love Rudy. Hi,
point.
Rudy.
Hi, Rudy. The whole point of the show is to, like, let's use the word suicide. Let's talk about suicidal ideation so that we can normalize it. And the fact that this doesn't just say happiness maker book,
Right.
like, start smiling book. Like, it says suicidal thoughts workbook. And there was a second where I was like, am I allowed to put that even in my title in Twitch? Like, I was worried it wasn't gonna, but it did, so we're
Oh,
fine.
good.
But it's normalizing it. We still have a long way to go. So it's another thing that I appreciate very much. Yeah.
Thank you. I do. That is something I think about too, even sharing information and talking about it. And I kind of land where you're landing, which is we've got to normalize it. We've got to talk about it in terms of speaking openly and directly and bluntly about it rather than not. But it is still awkward, and
Yeah, of
in
course.
that it doesn't, I think I get more used to it working in therapy and working as
Right.
a mental health advocate, that I sometimes forget that this isn't something that people just openly discuss a lot of the time.
Right. No, that's I mean, that's its own that's its own whole thing. And that's definitely, and I understand that. Like, as a person to person, if somebody comes to me, even
Mhm.
as a mental health advocate, and says, "I don't feel like living anymore," because that is our prime directive, right? As, like, chimpanzee descendants, like, I know I got that wrong, somebody's gonna come after me, but yeah, like, that is our prime directive, is to live. So for somebody to come to you and be like, "I don't want to do the one thing I'm supposed to be doing all the time," is very scary. So I try to we try to have conversations here that not just normalize but also create a space where, like, you don't have to say the big scary S word, but we could still talk about our feelings and thoughts and negative emotions that surround it, and be okay with them. But scary.
Yeah. That's why I love what you do, because I think that a lot of people who we lose to suicide, they haven't been in a therapy office in the previous weeks or previous month. And so it really mental health conversations happening elsewhere, like in Twitch and other places like that, I just think are key to having people recognize that they're not alone, and that it's okay to talk about emotions and difficult things. It doesn't make them a bad person or something wrong with them.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. So I don't want to make this just like this sales pitch for Suicidal Thoughts Workbook, because again, it is a weird space here that we're bridging of like, you should really check this out, but also we are talking about a really serious topic and I don't want to make light of it. But so what else are you doing? How's your podcast going and stuff? I'm going to post the links to that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
It's fun. My podcast is called Psychodrama, and my co-host is a good friend of mine from grad school who he lives in Portland and I live in Fargo, North Dakota, and we have very different experiences in the different regions of the country. And I went out there and visited him, and we talked just nonstop about a bunch of stuff, ranging from like stand-up comedy to clinical practice to whatever it was. And that's when we decided, after talking some more about, to start this podcast. And my biggest fear was like, we're not my biggest fear in general, but about the podcast was that like I'm gonna overbook myself and I'm not gonna have enough time to do it.
Sure.
But we both decided, look, we're just gonna make episodes when we can do it, and when we can't, we won't do it. And so it's been a lot of fun. Our big thing that we like to do is bring experts on, and I'm really excited about the one we're going to record tomorrow. Dr. Sarah Victor, who's a professor at Texas Tech, led a paper about lived mental health experiences within clinical counseling and school psychology programs, and talking about how common mental health difficulties are and why it's important to break stigma and prejudice within those fields. And so it's just a fun opportunity to talk to people who have a lot of expertise about these topics, and also to try to put information out in a way other than just in like academic journal articles.
Yeah. If you ever need games professionals, please do let me know. I'll happily send you to peeps. John the Peer says, thank you so much for normalizing the word suicide. As someone with a long experience of living with bipolar 1 disorder, suicidal thoughts are sometimes regularly occurring. But for me, living with and managing those thoughts is very different from being suicidal. Absolutely. Absolutely. Are you comfy with us opening a Q&A? As long as, again, we do, every disclaimer, every episode, Dr. Gordon is not here to be your therapist and cannot give. Why don't you do it? You'll do it better than I will. I'll just open the queue.
No, I like what you were saying. I'm not conducting therapy, but I can share general information or education in case it's helpful. But I recommend seeking a mental health professional who knows more about your background and what specifically applies to your life.
All right, here's our list. So the way to enter is exclamation join, I want to say. I know this. I've been only doing this for almost 4 years. But yeah, exclamation join, and you can ask your question. It can either be about the workbook or any of Dr. Gordon's otherwise work. Absolutely, tively. Okay, all right. So I did have other stuff. How did you come up? I thought it was the coolest thing. The meaning collage. That was the coolest heckin' thing. How did that? Is that like a thing known in psychology that I just never heard of before? Or did you come up? Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I came up with it. The Hope Kit I didn't come up with, but the meaning collage I did. I got really into, during the pandemic, rereading Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning, and his framework was very moving. I don't often finish books these days, but I read that one twice, and I love art. I appreciate it so much, but I'm not an artist at all. And so one of the things that I remember learning about in art therapy, or from some people who do art therapy, that collages are a way anyone can participate because you're just cutting stuff up
Mm-hmm.
and putting it together. And so I thought, okay, well, this is a way that we can do art and make meaning more salient and stand out to us, because in therapy, I notice a lot, people often feel stuck in situations. And one of the things that can be helpful if you can't change the situation is to think about, okay, but why is this meaningful? So if they're struggling with parenting and there are some difficult issues related to that, then we can talk about, okay, but what are your values? You value being a good parent, or you value being caring, or whatever activity it might be. And that making that meaning clearer can reduce some of the distress. And so I thought a nice visual collage might be a good way to make it stand out more. I'm very big on visual reminders because I've noticed that in therapy, that helps a lot when people can just reference something. I think that's part of why mental health stuff on Instagram is so popular, because it's kind of like, okay, this little quote can give me a boost when I need something or a reminder of something.
Yeah, yeah. So I found them to be so much it's so much more impactful to make than because everybody in the beginning of the year makes, like a manifestation
Yep.
collage, or what is it called, like goals
The
collage.
vision board.
Vision
Yeah,
board.
yeah.
Thank you. That is the word I was looking for. Yeah. So everybody in the beginning of the year makes their vision board, and I just thought this was so much more impactful to me.
Good.
Leshy, that was not a bad question to ask. That was not a bad question to ask. I'm definitely going to get to the questions. I know the questions are going to be good for this community. But yeah, we made a meaning collage, and it was actually so what I did is we made it online through Adobe Spark. And so we just like Googled things and then pulled them in, and then I was able to make it my computer background. So it was
I love that.
right in front of my face all the time. And people can use Canva or whatever, and it was great. And a few people in the community did the same thing, and then they sent them and shared them with each. It was great. It was really great. So I want to thank you for that. But I couldn't say much because I was like, I can't say it's from this book. But yeah, I can't wait to do it again, but this time be like, this is Dr. Katie Gordon's stuff. Okay, so there are some really good questions, so I think we're gonna jump right into them. So let's do that. Okay, Bliffle Splick asks, any interesting stories that came up as the book was being developed? You can take a second to think about this. This is off the cuff.
In terms of writing the book, or
I guess in terms of like as you were maybe developing it, or maybe doing any tests with somebody or running it by people, like how have people been receiving it, or just any other story really.
Yeah, a lot of the book, one of the things is that 2/3 of it was written during the pandemic, and I was trying to think at the time, what kind of recommendations am I going to make in terms of going out and doing things? I'm like, I want it to be relevant for when hopefully things open up a little bit, but it was a little bit tricky. I think that one of the things that was really helpful in the development of the book was I did share. I might lean over to get the graphic of it real quick.
You're
my
fine.
visual aid. I'll be right back.
Yeah. Ooh, I love it. We love visual aids here. We're just talking about the collage. I'm really stoked.
Well, so one of the things that I shared early on was, it wasn't as nice as this one. Elise Mariani, who's a wonderful artist,
I have that.
designed this. Yeah, and it's from the book, and the idea, I originally drew it as, the idea was, when you're feeling hopeless, because that's such a big part of having suicidal thoughts, what are some of the ways that you can just create little sparks of light? And I described that in the writing, but the picture I made was like candles, and I shared that with some people, and they're like, that's pretty somber, and like, that's really bringing me down, and I don't really feel good about it.
Right.
So I was very thrilled when Elise changed it to sparklers. I was like, that's a nice situation to do it. And so that was a helpful development for sure. And then I think that some of the other stuff, like doing a word cloud, is in the book. kind of focusing on physical safety and emotional safety. I think sometimes emotional safety isn't always as prioritized, because when someone is having suicidal thoughts, we want to make sure they're physically safe. And that's so important. But it's also really important that you're seeking support from people who you're comfortable with. And so the word cloud was really an idea from seeing people just using them to communicate what's most important to them. And so let me see, I have a picture in here somewhere. And I do think that when people make stuff like that, it kind of, this is things that the person feels, it's an example, help them to feel emotionally safe. And I do think that those things I've gotten positive reactions to. I think that I tend to be like a writer type person, but I know that the people in my life have told me they've really broken through some obstacles by being more creative. And so I think that's been the biggest thing that I tried to, it didn't come naturally, but tried to put in the book.
I think you did a great job.
Thank
Blissful,
you.
that was a great question. All right, let's do let's you more fast. Have you encountered suicidal individuals who've had either ASD or OCD?
Yes, I have mostly worked with people who have had obsessive compulsive disorder, who have had suicidal thoughts. And obsessive compulsive disorder can just be so painful. And there are some great treatments for it, but it is often, I get why people are in so much pain and feel hopeless when their brains are kind of pushing these awful thoughts towards them all of the time. I think it's really painful. And I think that one of the urges with OCD is to try to get rid of the thoughts, but it ends up making them worse often. And so therapy is hard for people for all kinds of issues, but with OCD, because you're kind of trying to be like, you're going to have those thoughts, but let's see if we can make them less distressing for you. And that doesn't, it's hard to accept that. And maybe suicidal thoughts are like that too, where it's, for some people, they're going to be there, and how can you work with them versus make them go away? And I don't think, I actually thought about this quite a bit. I don't think there's as much mental health awareness about kind of chronic mental health problems, and that sometimes that means that things don't completely go away, but that you're managing them in a way that you can still have a good quality of life.
Right, right. And I think the workbook is a great way to be able to do that. Martizel asked a great question. Any advice for being open about general suicidal thoughts versus suicidal ideation with your mental health team? I try to be open, but sometimes I'm overwhelmed when I feel like they get too worried when I discuss general suicidal thoughts. I know it's their job, but it stresses me out.
Absolutely. I think that is, there's a great book for therapists who work with people who struggle with suicidal thoughts by Stacy Friedenthal. And the whole opening is basically being able to manage your own anxiety so that people can disclose without feeling like you're feeling unsettled. If you're comfortable and feel safe with your team, I think it's okay to say that I'm struggling, but I also am worried about distressing you, and I don't want you to worry. I have had patients tell me that before, and on one hand, I'm like, I'm really glad that I'm going to be concerned and care about you, but I also want you to know that doesn't mean immediately that we're just going to talk about sending you to the hospital. Sometimes that's appropriate, but a lot of time there are other ways to manage suicidal thoughts that are effective for people. And so I think kind of openly sharing, I'm afraid to tell you this because of how you'll react, can sometimes open that conversation and put them at ease a little bit. Because if you're opening up about it, that's a great way to be safe and to try to address those problems.
Thank you. Cartha Bruja asks, ooh, this is a good one because I know the answer and it's a good one. Okay. Do you watch TV or movies and rage at how badly suicide is portrayed? What's a show movie that has handled it terribly, and what's one that has handled it well?
That is a great question. Yeah, my first podcast was all about this, right? Mental health depictions of in fiction. And so one of the ones that I have softened on a bit, but at the time when it came out, I really didn't like 13 Reasons Why. I co-hosted that podcast, Jedi Council, with my friend Brandon Saxton, and we ended up with 3 episodes talking about how we felt that it depicted the person who died by suicide. There was kind of violence. The mental health counselor was not helpful. It was depicted as like an act of revenge. I mean, there were so many things to it that really, really bothered us. Since then, I have heard from some others who have said that they felt like it was realistic and it helped them to open up conversations a bit more about suicidal thoughts. But that's the one that really got to me.
Yeah.
Younger people, when I was teaching as a professor, I think that some of the younger people were telling me that, and I thought that was interesting, and I wanted to acknowledge that could be helpful for some people.
Yeah, that's it, because that's the one I raged about the most as well, because I was like, you don't. It was revengeful, and that was the whole angle of it, and it felt glorifying almost.
Yeah.
It did not feel educational. It felt like a very over dramatic way of depict. So for those of you who don't know, check out the reviews, I think, to 13 Reasons Why before you actually watch, because it also is, they've like removed scenes from the official Netflix because there were a little bit too much.
Yeah, they didn't even have helplines initially or content warnings, I think, and they later edited them in, but I just was surprised that things like that I think seem obvious now. Like, you got to put helplines up there.
Yeah, like that's like not hard. Yeah.
That really bothered me. One of the depictions that I thought was really good was Crazy ExGirlfriend, which the title of the show sounds so stigmatizing.
Right, not right. We don't use the word crazy here, but yeah.
Yeah, no, I think that's why I was shocked, because I was like, that doesn't sound like a positive show. But then I actually watched it, and I thought that the main character is very sympathetic. You kind of see how she has a lot of factors in her life where her relationships and other stressors have impacted her, and she's experiencing pain and wants to escape it. And then she is diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, and I thought they actually did a good job talking about that. And it's a musical too, so she sang about it, and talked about the relief she felt at having an accurate diagnosis and treatment. So I was like, wow, this is surprisingly pretty good.
That turned around too, because I mean, I love musicals, don't get me wrong, but I was like, this is too much musical for me. I can't do musicals every episode. And then they did that, and I was like, oh, okay, I'm here for this. Exactly.
Yeah, because it's so goofy.
It is. It doesn't take itself too seriously, but then it does, and it gives you like a lot of comfort in when it does. It's great. Yeah. I didn't know that, Leshy. Okay, the next question is by Dark Acid. Is there any advice for someone who is caring or helping someone who has just lost someone close to them by suicide? How to not just tiptoe around it?
I think grief is one of the hardest things to be present for people, because there isn't really problem solving or fixing, right? I think what seems to help the most is to check in. When I work with patients in therapy who feel the worst dealing with grief following suicide, it's because they feel that people are awkward around them or avoiding them or won't talk about the person's memory. And so I think 2 things. One is to check in and talk about it and make it clear that you're not judgmental about it. So just directly saying, like, I know this must be really hard for you, and I want you to know that I'm here if you want to talk to me about it. And then the second thing that I sometimes forget to do is to ask the person, how can I best support you? Because I think that feels really good to people, because they're not used to being asked that. Usually people just kind of jump in with stuff. So sometimes with grief, they'll say, I don't know, but just being with me or knowing that you're there for
Right.
me makes a difference. And when I want to deal with it, there's also a really nice website called Refuge in Grief. And there's a book, It's Okay to Not Be Okay, which I like because it's got a lot of kind of resources and people, communities of people talking about dealing with grief, including suicide. So that's another resource I think can be helpful.
That's a really great resource. Thank you for that. I also always throw out Elizabeth Nepperman's book. She's been on my show before, and it's How to Survive the Irreverent Guide to Surviving Grief, I think. How to, no, the Irreverent Guide to Loss. That's what it is. Surviving months 1 through 3, and it's a really great book, and it does not tiptoe around anything, and it's very frank about like this sucks, and so that is our recommendation from the show because she's been a guest of the show several times.
I think that irreverence means a lot to people. Like
Yeah.
the Refuge and Grief website, their like tagline is grief support that doesn't suck. I mean, I do think that there's something refreshing about breaking down the formalities and barriers around talking about it.
It's but yeah, because I think everybody pretends that it's this big formal thing, but it's really it's an emotion and a feeling just like any other, and just. Man, and I've said this before, but like one of the two strongest words in the English language is that sucks. Like just saying that alone makes a huge difference to somebody who like just needs a little bit of comfort. Like that is comfort. Just being like it's just validation. That's,
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah. Surreal. One show that handled mental health and suicide really well was BoJack Horseman. To anyone who might want to watch it, be careful. Maybe watch it with someone else. It can be really tough. That's why I stopped watching BoJack Horseman. I was like, this is too real. Can't do it. But I heard they did a really good job.
Oh, I love that show. I wrote a little blog post about it that's on my website. Well, it's linked to on my website. Because I thought it was great, but you're right, it is intense and that can be too painful at times.
Elizabeth Knupferman, Knupferfer. I know I'm messing that up. Look up Advanced Bitches and go from there. Okay, so I cannot watch that show. I've seen clips. Yeah, exactly. For some people, for some people, it's really really hard. Okay, next. What is your opinion on question, persuade, refer method of dealing with individuals who feel like they're a danger to themselves? Do you recommend other trainings or techniques for professional peer supports? Great question. Thank you so much, Comfortable Stranger.
It is a great question. Unfortunately, I don't have a very knowledgeable answer. I have heard of that, but I don't know a lot of the details involved in that program. I'm more familiar with some of the mental health first aid type programs, and I like those. I think that the QPR I've heard solid critiques of, but I can't speak too knowledgeably about it, so I won't speculate. But
we love that here. Great. Oh my gosh. Yeah, well, it's not Comfortable Stranger. Check out Mental Health First Aid. We recommend it. I recommend it all the time here. I think it's what's helped me have this channel for as long as I've had it, honestly. Interesting. TikTok Clock asks, have you ever used TMS, transcranial magnetic stimulation? What are your thoughts about it?
I have known some people who have used it, and it seems like there still needs to be more research on it, but there are some people who have said that it's helped them, and some people have said it has not helped them, or that it's helped initially, but not later on. I think that it is important for therapists to acknowledge that even our best treatments don't work for everyone, or they work at different levels for people. And so I think it's important to expand and for people to continue to evaluate scientifically the effects of TMS and see how it might help people as a possibility. But I think there's a lot more to learn about it, especially long-term impacts and how it can help mental health.
Hi, hello. Most insurances don't cover magnetic therapy, so it's a bit of financial risk. Oh, interesting. All right, so that's not, it's not a given in any way. Leslie Morph asks, have you ever had patients who express aggression or resentment towards counselors, maybe even you?
Yes, and I find it very hard because I don't like when people are upset with me, even if it's not personal. Yeah, I think sometimes, first of all, I think counseling is hard, and sometimes people don't want to be there, and I get it because we're talking about it's not the most pleasant stuff. Making
Mm-hmm.
changes hopefully make things more pleasant, but in the short run, most of us are want to avoid thinking about those things. And so I think that it's happened a few times. One way that it happens is if like their partner insists they go into treatment but they don't want to be there, then they might not feel great about it. The other way that it happens is if I say something that bothers them, and the best thing I can do is try to apologize and empathize and try to understand where the person's coming from. And also I take it as a signal to look at what I'm doing. Was I being too pushy? Was I jumping to suggestions before
Mm.
fully understanding where they're coming from? Or do I feel like maybe there was kind of an interpretation of what I said that wasn't accurate that we can kind of talk about and try to clarify? But yeah, I don't like those moments. I don't think anyone does, but it certainly comes up, and it's understandable with something as personal as therapy.
Yeah, 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 and that's what we talked about in the beginning. Anytime, basically, just human nature is anytime you tell somebody, "Hey, you have to do this," they're usually like, "Nah, I don't wanna."
Yeah.
Even if I
And I
know it
get
might
it.
help me. Yeah, and that's what Leslie's saying in the audience. As a child, my mother tried forcing me into therapy, and I resisted a lot. Took realizing I needed it on my own terms as a teen. Yeah. Uh, but dark acid. All right, we're gonna get to dark acid's question because
Okay.
I think they ask this regularly, and I love it. Okay. So that was a great question. Thank you, Leslie Moore. Surreal asks, I don't know if this was already asked and I joined late, but how do you deal with suicidal thoughts when they're overwhelming you? Talking to someone is not always possible, and not everybody can handle it.
Yeah, there are a couple different things I think. One is there are crisis text lines and hotlines and warm lines where people can talk to people. 1-800-273-TALK in the United States is a good one. But there are also other resources. And so those are sometimes ways you can connect with people because they're usually available 24/7. But the other big thing that I think is important, and it's one of the early chapters in the workbook for this reason, is to come up with a plan for when they come up. And
Mm-hmm.
that involves some different aspects. The main aspects of it are how do I make sure I'm safe? Like if you have a gun in the home, how is it stored safely? If there are other things that might be methods you might hurt yourself, how do you remove or reduce your access to them to make sure that you're safe? And then secondly, what are some go-to strategies that reduce the intensity of the emotional pain? For some people, it can be something physical like taking a bath or a brisk walk or deep breathing or something like that. For other people, it has to be something distracting, like maybe playing a video game or watching a movie that's really engaging. And so there are some different ways in that moment to reduce some of the intensity of that. Other times it's helpful to look and say like what is my mind signaling to me? Usually there's something I'm in pain about. What is that pain, and are there things I can do to lessen that pain? So there are different approaches, and the key in the book is really if you can make those plans when you're not at your most intensely
Right.
suicidal. I think it's helpful because it's so hard in those moments to really, whenever you're in intense emotions, to think about skills to use. But the idea in the book is that if you have a plan that you can go to, it's like, okay, here are 5 things I can do. Or if you have a meaning collage or you've made a hope kit with things that give you hope, that's something you can access in those moments that you know is going to help you to feel a bit better at least.
Yeah, yeah. So surreal. I also would like to. I don't know if Dr. Gordon can say this without blushing, but the workbook is really good. And what I used to do when I was uncomfortable having somebody know that I had a workbook is I put a paper cover on it so people couldn't see what it is, and then I put I wrote on the paper cover textbook so that people thought I was just like, oh, I'm just protecting a textbook I have so that the corners don't get bent and I can get all my money back for it at the end of the semester. And nobody asked anything. Okay, all right. So we only have time for just a few more questions, so I am going to have to cut you all off. I'm sorry. We are at the ultimate question that the server asks. It is our equivalent of 100 duck-sized horses or horse-sized ducks or whatever the heck it is. But do you know what the word bumfuzzle means? If not, do you have a guess?
I have no clue. I have heard it. Is that like a nice way of saying a usual like profanity?
I don't know. I guess you decide what bumfuzzle means to you.
Because I have heard it in other ways, and I've heard it used to mean like someplace in the middle of nowhere.
Sure.
Similar to the word I'm thinking of.
Right. So I've decided, for me personally, but that's not for every guest, is that it is the fuzz off of someone's butt. Meaning it is an opinion that doesn't matter so much that it might as well be the fuzz on somebody's butt.
Okay, that's not close to what I thought, but good to know.
Oh, I don't know if that's correct. That's not, I don't know. I actually have never Googled it out of principle, but that's what it means to me. Like, oh man, that's some bumfuzzle you're spewing out there. And hold on, I think we have one more question. What often causes the brains of people who are two-faced, disingenuous to behave as they do? Be it examples like simple gossip or extreme actions like maybe framing them for crimes. Less you more fast. I think we need we did have at one point a psychologist, what do you call it? There's a specific psychologist who like deals with this stuff and talks about this.
Forensic type?
Yeah, forensic psychologist. We did have a forensic psychologist on at one point.
Yeah, my podcast co-host is a forensic psychologist, so might have their ways. I think the short answer is I think people do it for different reasons. I think for some people, they get a thrill. I did work as a therapist in a correctional facility for a while when I was in grad school, and it was different reasons. I think one, people growing up in difficult circumstances learn those behaviors are modeled for them and then they repeat them. I think other people enjoy deceiving people and get kind of a thrill out of that. And so I think it can be different pathways to those types of behaviors.
Yeah. Well, this was amazing. Okay. So you got to plug all the things. The first link you're seeing, fam, is the Amazon link to get the Suicidal Thoughts Workbook. Thank you so much. It is a mouthful of a title. You can see the title on my Twitter if you want to. I'm not saying the whole thing, but it's a good one, okay? But personally, I endorse it on page 1, but also having personally used it, I thought it was absolutely fantastic. So thank you so much.
Thank you. That means the world to me. It really does.
I'm really excited to get a physical copy. I'm really stoked.
I hope soon.
We'll get there. Okay. Yeah. So let's talk about everything else, all the other things that you do, your website and your practice and your and the podcast and all that good stuff.
Sure. The best way to access this stuff is if you go to kathrynhgordon.com. There's a link to, I have a Psychology Today blog out of the ivory tower that is infrequently updated, but I have blog posts directly on my website as well. The podcast is Psychodrama Podcast, and that's available through most podcast apps, but you can also access that through my website has a link to it. And so those are, the podcast and the book are the big things I'm into these days.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being here. We're posting the link all over the place. Dr. Kathryn Gordon, Suicidal Thoughts Workbook. Grab it on Amazon right meow while we are going to be right back. So go on Amazon while, instead of looking at the loading screen. Come on. Thank you so much for being on again, Dr. Gordon.
Thank you all for joining, and thanks for the wonderful questions.
Yay. Wrong button.